Chapter 4. The Black Belt. The Negro population in America became a target for the communists as early as 1921. The Negroes were to be considered an oppressed colony, who should be agitated and terrorized into the semblance of seeking freedom and independence. This official program was laid down in the booklet American Negro Problems by John Pepper, published in 1928. Pepper was an alias of Moscow's agent Joseph Pogany, who had been one of the top subversive agents in the communist regime in Hungary. He was then directed to the United States to begin work for a Negro revolutionary movement. In his book he wrote, "The Workers' Communist Party of America, in its fight against imperialism, must recognize clearly the tremendous revolutionary possibilities of the liberation movement of the Negro people. The Negro communists should emphasize in their propaganda the establishment of a Negro Soviet Republic." Pepper's basic formula for Negro revolutionaries has been carried down to the present time in what the communists call the Black Belt states. One of the lines used to promote unrest and agitation among Negroes is, "Revolution is not a matter of our own choosing. It is forced upon us by capitalism itself, which degrades us, grinds us down into the dust, makes life unbearable." But Robert Welch said, "The 20 million Negroes in America undoubtedly own more automobiles, more bathtubs, and more television sets and more freedom, and more opportunity than all of the Negroes on the continent of Africa, and all of the 200 million residents of Soviet Russia put together." But the communists never allow such facts to interfere with their propaganda. Peace marches, demonstrations, or open rioting are all agitated by some form of propaganda. They are either enticed into believing their situation is frightfully pitiful, or that they should demand more privileges in welfare, jobs, or land. In 1921, the Communist International at Moscow instructed American communists to organize and lead the Negro masses. In 1928, Joseph Stalin gave specific directions. The communist goal was to confiscate the property of all whites in the Black Belt region of the American southern states, detach the region from the Union, and establish it as a Negro Soviet Republic. This communist objective has never been altered. It was laid aside in 1941 when Nazi armies invaded the Soviet Union and held in abeyance until 1946. Since then, tactics have been more subtle than before World War II, slogans have changed, and more well-intentioned non-communists, especially clergymen and college students, have been duped into doing the party's racial agitation work, but the goal has remained fixed. Bloody race war in the United States. Dan Smoot Report. February 22, 1965, a well-known and patriotic Negro by the name of Manning Johnson, who once had been a communist agent, wrote a book about the communist plot to use the Negro people in America. He had been duped by their subtle persuasions and witnessed for himself the conniving objectives of the party. After realizing the big lie of communism, he turned back and exposed the communist plots and directives. He said, "To sink their claws in, subvert and use the Negro people, Moscow must have loyal, dedicated, trained Negro professional revolutionists who can easily be manipulated, that is, made to follow the party line." Manning Johnson. Color Communism and Common Sense, page 34. Former communist Benjamin Gitlow, picture of Gitlow, describes the coming revolution. Benjamin Gitlow was head of the U.S. Communist Party in 1928. He later was expelled from the party, and then made an expose of their conspiracy in America. Here is an excerpt from his article in the Congressional Record on August 7, 1963. Communists and their supporters intend to arouse to a fever heat the nationalist and chauvinist sentiments now finding expression in segments of the Negro population into a drive for separation of the Negroes from the whites through the establishment of an independent Negro Republic in the United States. The communists are deliberately maneuvering among the American Negroes to create a situation for the outbreak of racial violence, to such an extent that it can be turned into a civil war on a racial basis. In such a civil war, should they succeed in fomenting it, the communists hope to so undermine the American government and our social structure that they can take over power. In the racial civil war they envisage, they are sure Negroes will be in the front ranks, the shock troops of the communist revolution. Until recently, the communist policy has been to soft pedal their demand for a Negro separationist movement to oust the whites from the South, expropriate their lands and property, and establish a Negro Republic under communist hegemony. But now the slogan of self-determination for the Negro is in the forefront of the American Communist Party's general program. The communists know where they are going and they are hell-bent on getting there, even if they have to drown the American Negroes in their own blood to get the power they covet. The vast majority of Negro people in the United States are patriotic, and they have a deep love of country and home. Most of them realize the hidden hand that causes havoc among their people, and many thousands of them have been the victims of the violence and rioting. A few others are being trapped into the Communist Party line, and are unaware of the real masters they serve. One of the most controversial Negroes of our generation was Martin Luther King. To many he is known as one of the greatest Americans of our age. To others he has been identified and exposed as a fellow traveler of the Communist Party USA. He spoke well of the rights and ideological principles of the Negro people. However, many of his associates, organizations with which he was affiliated, and the manner in which he operated, were all very questionable. Alan Stang, author, television writer, producer, and former business editor for Prentice Hall Incorporated, wrote the following commentary on the methods of a nonviolent demonstration used by Martin Luther King. It was Sunday morning in Alabama. It was clear. It was cool. It would be a perfect day. And the most wonderful thing about it was that a foreboding, pervasive sense of nonviolence hung heavy in the air, a premonition of nonviolence in the afternoon. Selma was so full of nonviolence it was fit to bust. At one end of the bridge were the troopers, mounted and afoot, billies in hand. Nothing much needs to be said about them. Everybody knows, don't they, that all white Alabamians, especially the police, are filled with hatred and police brutality. At the other end of the bridge were the others, meek, innocent, pure, abused, the civil rights fighters. Nothing much needs to be said about them. Everybody knows that they were stuffed with love. They were full of it, crammed with it. There was no way at all you could jam in any more of it. The troopers tensed. The marchers marched. Was this going to be at last? Were we finally going to get some nonviolence going? Most people were basically so peaceful you had to spend such a long time lying before you got any of it at all. And then what you got might not even be decent. For weeks, Newsweek of March 22, 1965 explains, Martin Luther King had been escalating his Selma voter registration campaign toward the state he calls back, quote, creative tension, the setting for a paroxysm of segregationist violence that can shock the nation to action. The Negro's rationale in holding night marches, explains the New York Times of February 24, 1964, is to provoke the racist element in white communities to show its worst. Believe me, you don't know what work is until you've tried to provoke some nonviolence. And then at last, oh happy days, the troopers were charging across the bridge, kicking and clubbing and tear gassing. Gosh, it was wonderful. It was great. Man, you talk about nonviolence. Newsweek of March 22, 1965 tells it this way, At a half walk, half run, troopers shoved and clubbed the marchers into retreat. Behind them, the sheriff's cavalry mounted a Cossack charge into the scattering column. Cossacks. You get it? You remember the Cossacks. They were the crowd who used to ride down the luckless Russian workers on orders of the Tsar. Later on, the workers made a revolution. You may have heard about it. But Alabama Cossacks didn't do it on orders of the Tsar. The only reason they were there at all, it seems, has that the march had been forbidden. Because of this very premonition of nonviolence by an order from George Wallace, the Ivan the Terrible of American society, otherwise known as the governor of the once sovereign state of Alabama, if you will pardon the expression. Now, what's the point to all this nonviolence? We know it's about civil rights, of course, but why must the nonviolence get so bloody? What's the theory behind it? Well, the man behind it is of course the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he tells us about it all in Saturday Review for April 3, 1965. 1. Nonviolent demonstrators go into the streets to exercise their constitutional rights. 2. Racists resist by unleashing violence against them. 3. Americans of conscience, in the name of decency, demand federal intervention and legislation. 4. The administration, under mass pressure, initiates measures of immediate intervention and remedial legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, here it is from the man himself. Let's spell it out in English. 1. Nonviolent demonstrators, that's anyone who, say, has a pair of sandals and needs a bath, go into the streets to provoke the Hicks. 2. Racists, that's anyone, say, who doesn't have a pair of sandals and doesn't need a bath, finally lose their heads or are simply forced to use violence, as in Selma. 3. Americans of conscience, that's a reader of the New York Times, a professor at Yale, or anybody calling himself a clergyman put on the pressure for more federal intervention to promote collectivism that leads to communism. 4. The administration, I don't know who that is, under mass pressure, you know what that is, sends in more troops and passes more laws. In short, and remember that this is from the massive brain of the man himself. The violence that usually occurs in a King production isn't unexpected, isn't to be avoided, isn't something to be sorry about. It is exactly what he wanted. It is the point to the whole production. It is in fact, says Dr. King, the only reason for a nonviolent demonstration, to generate pressure on the Congress to install more collectivism. As we have seen, the Selma March, for instance, caused the lightning passage of the Voting Rights Bill, under which the federal government, rather than the states, now conducts voting registration. The point being, of course, that in any dictatorship, whether communist or Nazi, all the power must be centralized. So when Dr. King sees the troopers, he isn't sorry. Lando Goshen, no, he's glad. The paroxysm is on its way. He loves to see his own supporters get their skulls cracked. You see, when the nonviolence broke out in Selma, for instance, the skull of King as chance would have it was safe in Atlanta. What does it all mean? What's behind it? What manner of man is Martin Luther King? Well, there are all sorts of opinions. The Reverend Ralph Abernathy, for instance, explained on the Selma March, according to the New Yorker of April 10, 1965, that King was conceived by God. Legend has it, we read in Newsweek of April 2, 1965, that after his conviction for leading the Montgomery bus boycott, Negroes gathered outside shouting, "Behold the King! Long live the King!" A strange thing occurred after the terrors of the rioting in Watts. Martin Luther King, Hawkins, and Dimely came to Watts and called for a police review board to end their police brutality. Associates and friends of Martin Luther King have been an indication, if not an indictment, against King's objectives. One of the most active and widely traveled civil rights leaders is Bayard Rustin. Rustin, who is best known for organizing the March on Washington in 1963, was an organizer for the Young Communist League. During World War II, Rustin spent 26 months in federal prison for draft evasion. In 1953, he pleaded guilty to a sex perversion charge in Pasadena, California. In 1957, while employed as Martin Luther King's personal secretary, Rustin attended the National Convention of the Communist Party. In 1958, while still in King's employ, Rustin went to Soviet Russia to participate in an anti-American propaganda show called the Nonviolent Action Committee Against Nuclear Weapons. Rustin accompanied King in 1964, when King accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. Civil Riots USA, page 13. Perhaps the most popular or publicized picture ever printed of Martin Luther King is the following photograph of his attendance at the Highlander Folk School. Picture a training school for communists. The above picture was made by an employee of the state of Georgia at the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee. During the Labor Day weekend of 1957, the photographer was sent to the Highlander Folk School by the Georgia Commission on Education. The Highlander Folk School was abolished by an act of the legislature of the state of Tennessee at a later date, because it was charged with being a subversive organization. Those numbered in the picture are 1. Martin Luther King, Jr. 2. Abner W. Berry, a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. 3. Aubrey Williams, president of the Southern Conference Education Fund Incorporated, a fellow traveling organization, and 4. Miles Horton, director of the Highlander Folk School for Communist Training, Monteagle, Tennessee. Carl Prussian, a former FBI counterspy, has this to say about Martin Luther King Jr. I further do solemnly swear and attest that ... 1 Rev. Martin Luther King was always set forth as the individual to whom communists should look and rally around in the communist struggle on the many racial issues. ... I hereby also state that Martin Luther King has either been a member of, or wittingly has accepted support from communist fronts, individuals, and/or organizations which give aid to or espouse communist causes, numbering over 60. While openly preaching nonviolence in Chicago this summer, Martin Luther King and his agents have been actively organizing Negro bands and planning violence. His purpose is to gather $1 million a year from the suckers who contribute to his organization. King gave the closing speech at this convention. Paul Crouch, a former top Communist Party official, told a congressional committee, "The Highlander Folk School is operated ostensibly as an independent labor school, but actually is working in close cooperation with the Communist Party." SCEF report. U.S. Senate, page 47. Another Negro who has functioned in civil turmoils is Muhammad Kenyatta. Muhammad Kenyatta, The church has long been a focal point for 25-year-old Muhammad Kenyatta, better known to Chester residents as Donald Brooks Jackson. Kenyatta comes from a background steeped in church activities. Most remember him as a 14-year-old boy preacher discussing the Bible from the pulpit of Chester's Calvary Baptist Church. The Santaquin Kenyatta is now the Pennsylvania delegate of the National Black Economic Development Conference, which is demanding $500 million in reparations from white churches. He led a takeover of the Robert Wade Neighborhood Recreation Center in Chester last June, and was one of the chief spokesmen for the Black Manifesto cause during July's week-long occupation of the Cookman Memorial Church in North Philadelphia. Kenyatta, a graduate of Edison High School here, attended Lincoln University 1 year before serving in the U.S. Air Force. He then attended Williams College near Boston 2 years. The use of rights for wrong purposes may be the means of bringing about the downfall of our republic. A closer look at the Black Manifesto may be very revealing. One editor wrote, "The Black Manifesto is making deep inroads into the churches in the Philadelphia area." The Evening Bulletin, October 6, carried a 3-column front-page headline, reporting that a diocesan committee proposed that the Episcopalians raise $5 million for the Black economic development. The funds are also to be distributed solely by the diocesan Black clergymen. The Black clergy in the leadership of the Episcopal Church are also a part of the Black Economic Development Conference, and their key leader is none other than Muhammad Kenyatta, the vice president of the Black Economic Development Conference. Kenyatta has also announced the establishment of a Negro publishing house in Philadelphia, which will print the literature for the Black Economic Development Conference, including the Black Manifesto itself. This manifesto calls for revolution, the overthrowing of the United States government, and charges the United States of being the most barbaric nation on the face of the earth. Communism is seeking to use the Negro to destroy his freedom and the freedom of everyone else. Negroes must not be helped to become communists, they must be helped to be Christians. Christian Beacon, October 9, 1969. The Black Panthers are another group of Negroes who have been duped into the enticements of conspirators, said Robert Welch to the members of the John Birch Society. The Black Panthers are not even in the mainstream of the revolution. They are being used by agents of the insiders far above them to beat their breasts and make loud noises, like the guerrillas whom they so much resemble, to commit crimes and provoke resentment over their crimes, and otherwise to make it easier for the insiders gradually to bring into existence a federal police force and carry out many other steps in the name of law and order which lead toward a future police state. 10,000 active, screaming, militant, murdering Black Panthers, with all the publicity and semblance of importance given them by the pro-communist influences in our press, can be extremely useful in creating the desired mood among the American people. And what can we do about it? Why, simply get more people to understand how all these pieces of the puzzle fit neatly into the communist strategy. Don't worry about the Black Panthers, except to keep your local police forces as independent and unfettered as possible, so as to minimize the Panthers' crimes. A patriotic Negro by the name of Donald Jackson wrote an article which, because of its high merits, was inserted into the Congressional Record. He wrote, "I am a Negro who attended college in Mississippi and am the author of 2 books. The editor and publisher of a monthly called Wire magazine. And probably the only Negro manager of a (LET) Freedom Ring station in the United States. Why haven't the voices of the intelligent, decent, respectable Negroes of Mississippi been heard? It's heartbreaking to read in the press and to see on television the vicious, untruthful statements regarding the citizens of Mississippi. James Meredith, who now lives in New York City, should try cleaning up the terrible conditions existing in New York and the Negro community. In many areas, it is unsafe for male or female to walk, or even ride a subway, without being attacked. Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr.'s district has over 60% of the people living there unregistered and not eligible to vote. The crime rate in New York City in the Negro community is 0.000% higher than the white community, and 500% higher than any other in the country. The illegitimacy rate in the Negro community in New York City is 43.41%. The Negro clergy of the National Council of Churches are the Negro people's greatest enemy. You no doubt have already seen where many Negro clergy bleed their members for money. Their sole interest seems to be a fine new church, where they can bring other ministers to show off a late model Cadillac and a big salary. The Negroes of Mississippi should check the background of some of the travelers and clergy in the civil rights movement. You will find automobile thieves, bootleggers of whiskey, rapists, pro-communist sympathizers and publicity-seeking hounds, using God's most holy temple to plot evil against his brother, under the guise it is helping the Negroes. When this conspiracy is directed and encouraged by the Communist Party, any Negro who is a member of a church that holds these hate meetings under the guise that it is for civil rights, should boot the preachers out of their church. Many of you have been fooled by the press that the KKK shot James Meredith. Many of you know about guns. Birdshot will kill a bird, but it will take a shot of birdshot at very close range to seriously injure a human being. The liberal press wants you to believe that the man that was supposed to have shot Meredith was plotting to take his life. I'm sure you will have heard that this gentleman called Mr. Meredith twice by his name before firing a single shot. If this man had wanted to kill Meredith, he would have used a rifle. Meredith had his press secretary on hand taking a picture of Meredith hitting the ground. Of the gunman and a clergy praying. It is obvious this whole affair was well planned. You Negroes should tell Dr. King and his group of professional rabble-rousers that the Mississippians can handle their problems without that beatnik trash that comes to the South for the sole purpose of exploiting the Negro and his problems. Congressional Record, August 12, 1966, p. 1723. The heads of the Communist Party are adamant in their determination to subvert whites, Negroes, organizations, and even churches to obtain a revolution in America. The Negro was one of the first objectives of the Communists, and they wrote, Comrades Browder, Edwards, and Ford have spoken about the necessity of making a turn in our Negro work, how to connect ourselves with the organized masses in the United States. There are, of the Negro population, 10 million in churches. The problem of how to penetrate these organizations is of the utmost political importance. Party Organizer, page 16, March 1935, by the Central Committee Communist Party. Former Communist member Manning Johnson verified these objectives and he wrote, the Communists try to exploit these national, racial and religious differences in order to weaken, undermine and subjugate America to Moscow. Like a serpent, they use guile to seduce each group. During the 3 decades which have elapsed since the 6th World Congress in Moscow, the American Communist Party has conducted many campaigns and formed and infiltrated a large number of organizations among Negroes. From the bloody gun battles at Camp Hill, Alabama, 1931, to the present integration madness, the heavy hand of communism has moved, stirring up racial strife, creating confusion, hate and bitterness, so essential to the advancement of the Red Cause. Color, Communism and Common Sense, by Manning Johnson, page 20 and 28. The Communists know that a divided people are easily conquered. They realize that if they can manipulate Americans to fighting Americans, their battle is won. One of the most important projects of our enemies is to create a race war between the Negro against the whites and the whites against the Negro. The principle of the communist game is hatred. The Negroes and the whites of America must not fall into that trap. The blame for riots and revolution must be placed where it belongs, with the agitators and dupes of the communist ideology. How strange indeed are the voices of the revolutionaries and protectors so often and continually heard, while the patriotic and honorable citizens who voice the truth are hidden in silence. Occasionally a clear voice, amidst the rabble and confusion of a biased press and a garbled news media, rings true and clear. Such were the straightforward, honest feelings of a Negro woman who wrote this letter to Congressman Wayne L. Hayes. So pay attention. I am not a white racist, but a 40-year-old Negro woman who knows what she is talking about, so pay attention. What is wrong with you in Washington? You keep giving the poor more free handouts when what they need is a job so they can learn to work and help themselves. Welfare alone has been their ruination. If you give a check or commodities, make them do something in return. If you give education or job training, make them earn it. There are many things that need doing in this country. Roads need repair. Trees on our city streets need trimming. There is litter on the sidewalks. City buildings need painting. Hospitals and nursing homes can always use a little more help. Women on relief could take some foster children. When the children are in school, they could do other volunteer work. Do you people really not know that any human who gets something for nothing loses all pride and initiative? You are completing the destruction of the Negro male by all these so-called progressive programs. Many of those collecting welfare are driving around in big cars and have expensive furs. My husband and I, who are taxpayers, can't afford these things. Why aren't people investigated before they are given charity? Don't tell me we cannot find work for them to do. If I cannot get what I want, I scrub floors, and have done so. My mother taught me nothing was beneath me if it was honest. I am not the only one who feels this way. Many hard-working people, black and white, are getting fed up with this free policy. We are sick and tired of making sacrifices to support those who are too lazy to stand on their own 2 feet. We are not going to stand for it forever. Sincerely, Sadie, Mrs. Emery Willis, East Liverpool, Ohio.